A flight attendant fed a black baby rotten food as a joke, unaware his father was the health secretary. You must join our channel and hit subscribe, because only those who believe no black baby should be fed harmful food as a joke will do it before this story begins. The flight from West Haven to Ledger City was supposed to be a routine one. The skies were clear, the cabin quiet, and the passengers settled in for the 2-hour journey. Yet, in the midst of this ordinary flight, a small act of arrogance would set in motion a chain of events that no one on board could foresee. Gregory Hartwell, a flight attendant with a penchant for offhand humor, strolled down the aisle with a tray of food. He paused at the seat where Andre Brown sat, a well-respected health official, unaware of who he was. Gregory's eyes skimmed the group of first-class passengers, then settled on Marcus Brown, Andre's 2-year-old son, who was sitting in his father's lap. With a smirk on his face, Gregory placed a plate of mashed potatoes in front of Marcus, unaware of the sour stench that would soon fill the air. The moment Marcus caught a whiff, his face contorted in disgust. He gagged, his tiny hands pushing away the plate, but it was already too late. The smell had already permeated the air, making the other passengers recoil in silent horror. For a brief moment, no one said anything. The flight attendants shared glances, some biting back laughter, not realizing the seriousness of the situation. Gregory, with his arrogant smirk, took a step back, his posture relaxed as if waiting for some kind of reaction from the passengers. But the only reaction came from Marcus, who was now on the verge of tears, his little face flushed from the combination of the smell and the humiliation. Andre's eyes widened in disbelief as he took in the scene. His son, whom he had brought on this flight for a peaceful journey, was sitting there crinkling his nose in disgust. Andre's stomach churned with a mix of frustration and disbelief, but he kept his composure. He couldn't afford to react, not in front of the other passengers. His thoughts raced. This is going to backfire, he thought, his fingers curling tightly around the armrest as he tried to keep his emotions in check. He had worked too hard to get to this point. He was the health secretary of Ledger City now, overseeing a national health reform. His work would soon impact millions of people, and here he was, watching his son be treated like this by someone who couldn't even do their job properly. The flight crew continued to act oblivious, their laughter barely masked as they moved to the next row. They had no idea who Andre was. The name Brown meant nothing to them, and the presence of a disgruntled passenger was just another minor inconvenience. But Andre knew that what had just happened wasn't just about spoiled food. It was a message, one that would be heard by many, even if it wasn't clear yet. Andre forced a calm smile as he turned to the flight attendant closest to him, his voice firm but controlled. "Excuse me," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This food is spoiled. I'd like it replaced with something fresh, please." Gregory, not realizing the weight of the situation, looked back at him with a dismissive glance. "It's not that bad," he muttered, waving a hand in the air. "It's just a little mistake. Happens all the time." Andre's chest tightened at the flight attendant's nonchalant attitude. He could feel the heat rising in his face, but he kept it in check. "My son is clearly uncomfortable," Andre said, his voice dropping low. "And, as you can see, the food is unfit to serve." Gregory barely acknowledged the seriousness of Andre's words as he turned away, moving to the next passenger. Andre's heart sank as he realized that the flight crew had no idea what they had just done. He glanced down at Marcus, who was still looking at the food with a mix of confusion and discomfort. The child had no words, just the instinctive reaction of a toddler who knew something wasn't right. The tension in the air was thick now. Andre's mind raced, processing the implications of what had just happened. If this incident were to get out, it wouldn't just reflect poorly on Altura Airlines, it would reflect poorly on him as well. His reputation, his career, and his integrity were all at risk over something so trivial as a meal. What they didn't know was who they had offended, Andre thought bitterly. His son, his life, had just become the battleground for something far larger than a spoiled plate of mashed potatoes. There was more at stake now. There was a deeper issue of public perception at play. A small mistake like this, unchecked and dismissed, could snowball into something far worse. Andre's grip tightened around the armrest as he returned to his seat with Marcus in tow, the sickening odor of spoiled food still lingering in the air. His son, still clutching his small stomach, looked up at him with eyes full of confusion and discomfort. The flight attendants continued to carry on with their duties, blissfully unaware of the storm they were about to unleash. Andre's mind was already racing, his thoughts quickly shifting from his son's well-being to the far-reaching consequences of the incident. When he turned to Richard Phelps, the senior flight attendant, Andre's calm exterior betrayed the tightening tension within him. Phelps, busy rearranging his uniform, seemed unbothered by the tension that hung in the air. His eyes flicked briefly to Marcus, then back to Andre, as if dismissing the matter without truly acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "I'd like a new meal for my son," Andre said, his voice controlled but firm, a subtle edge to his tone. He knew better than to escalate things immediately. The last thing he wanted was to make a scene on a public flight, but there was no ignoring the blatant negligence of the crew. Phelps glanced at Marcus, his lips curling into an almost dismissive smile. "It wasn't that bad, was it? Just a small mistake," he muttered, his voice flat and uninterested. He paused for a moment, seemingly expecting Andre to accept the apology without protest. "We can't always avoid these little things, you know." Andre's jaw clenched as he leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not like this. "I don't think you understand," he began, his voice low and dangerous now. "This isn't just a mistake. My son was served spoiled food that could have made him sick. You need to take this seriously." Phelps shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the side as if searching for a way to deflect responsibility. The faint sound of snickering came from a few rows behind them, and Andre's gaze flicked toward the source. A couple of the other flight attendants had caught the exchange and were watching the scene unfold with amused expressions. Andre's stomach twisted in disgust, realizing that this was no longer about the meal, it was about something much more insidious. He wasn't just any passenger on this flight. He was the Health Secretary of Ledger City, a man who had been entrusted with overseeing a national health reform initiative. If this incident were to reach the media, it could not only ruin his reputation but also undermine the very work he was doing. He could already imagine the headlines, "Health Secretary's family served spoiled food on airliner." The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him as the reality set in. "I don't want to make this public," he said softly, his voice laced with a barely contained fury, "but if this continues, I'll have no choice." His eyes locked onto Phelps, daring him to push back. "I will be filing a formal complaint, and you can be sure it won't end here." Phelps, now visibly rattled, nodded, muttering something about the airline's policy, though his voice lacked any real conviction. He glanced away, obviously hoping that the situation would fade into obscurity. "It's just a small mistake, Mr. Brown," he said, his tone more resigned now. "Nothing to get worked up about." Andre stood there for a moment, staring at Phelps, but he could feel his composure cracking. He had grown accustomed to dealing with larger issues, but this was different. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a blow to his authority, an insult to the very office he held. He clenched his fists at his sides, forcing himself to stay calm. This wasn't just a bad meal. It was a message. The words echoed in his mind as he turned back to Marcus, his son still sitting quietly in his seat, unaware of the magnitude of the conflict surrounding them. Andre could feel the eyes of the passengers on him now. Whispers rippled through the cabin, each word like a needle poking at his nerves. A few passengers had overheard the exchange, their voices barely audible but unmistakable. Some were sympathetic, others judgmental. All were paying attention. Andre's heart pounded in his chest, knowing that word of this could spread like wildfire, and once it did, there would be no controlling the fallout. "I'm going to need to get this sorted," Andre muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. As the plane descended toward Ledger City, he already knew what was coming next. His assistant, Raymond Shaw, was waiting for him on the ground, ready to help him draft a formal complaint to Altura Airlines. But Andre's mind wasn't just on the spoiled food. He had a sinking feeling that this incident was only the beginning of a much larger storm. The plane touched down with a soft thud, the cabin humming to life as the wheels hit the runway. But for Andre, the flight was far from over. The stakes had been raised, and what had seemed like a small issue moments ago now felt like a personal attack. As he stood up to gather his things, he looked back at Marcus. Still too young to understand the complex world of politics and public perception, but old enough to know that something was wrong. Outside, the airport seemed oblivious to the storm that was brewing. But inside the cabin, Andre's thoughts swirled, his mind racing with what to do next. He wasn't just fighting for an apology anymore. He was fighting for control of the narrative. And he knew, as the plane doors opened and the crowd began to disembark, that the battle had only just begun. This wasn't just a bad meal, it was a message. As the plane descended into Ledger City, Andre Brown sat stiffly in his seat, staring out of the window as the city's skyline came into view. The weight of the moment was heavy, but his exterior remained calm, a facade he had perfected over the years. The smell of the spoiled food still lingered in his nostrils. The memory of his son's pained expression burned into his mind. Marcus had been a trooper, his little face scrunching in discomfort as he tried to swallow the rancid mashed potatoes. But the moment had passed, and now Andre was left with the consequences of that flight attendant's careless mistake. The plane touched down with a quiet thud, the wheels kissing the runway. It was a routine landing, but to Andre, it felt like a jarring wake-up call. The situation had gone from something small, a simple error of judgment, to something much larger. What had been a moment of thoughtless humor on the part of Gregory Hartwell, the flight attendant, had turned into a potential public relations disaster. Andre wasn't just any passenger. He was the health secretary of Ledger City, about to oversee a massive national health reform, and in this moment, his reputation was on the line. Andre's mind raced as the plane taxied toward the gate. His hand, though still gripping the armrest, betrayed a slight tremble. He felt a flicker of anger, a flash of something much deeper. But he reined it in, taking a slow, controlled breath. Public perception would be key. If he handled this poorly, it would not only harm his family but also derail the progress of the health reforms he had been working tirelessly on. The very thing that gave him strength, his role in the health sector, was now the thing that could make him vulnerable. Once the plane had parked and the seatbelt sign flicked off, Andre gathered himself. "Stay calm," he told himself. Raymond Shaw, his assistant and confidant, was waiting for him just beyond the gate. Raymond had been by Andre's side for years, always quick on his feet, always one step ahead. Andre could already hear Raymond's voice in his mind, an anchor of reason amidst the chaos. "Let's take care of this quietly, and then we'll figure out the next steps," Andre murmured under his breath. He didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to draw any unnecessary attention. He was aware of how quickly situations could escalate, how rumors could spiral out of control in an age of viral content. He wasn't sure whether he was more worried about the spoiled food incident or the wave of public scrutiny that would surely follow. When Andre reached the terminal, Raymond was already there, waiting by the baggage claim. The assistant wasted no time. "I've got a draft of the complaint ready. It's all professional, outlining the facts. We'll need to send it to Altura Airlines as soon as possible." "Good," Andre replied, glancing briefly at the letter. His eyes skimmed over the words, though his mind was elsewhere. The complaint wasn't just about spoiled food, it was about ensuring that this small mistake didn't turn into something much bigger. Andre was a public figure, and anything, even something as trivial as a bad meal, could be twisted into a personal attack. If the airline mishandled this, it could turn into a scandal that would haunt him, his family, and his career. Meanwhile, back at the gate, the flight attendants were none the wiser. As the passengers shuffled off the plane, Richard Phelps, the senior attendant, exchanged a laugh with Gregory Hartwell. "Well, that wasn't so bad, huh? One little complaint and he's already ready to take us to court." Gregory smirked, his arrogance still evident. "A little spoiled food, no big deal. This kind of thing happens all the time, right?" He seemed convinced that Andre would forget about it soon enough, just like so many passengers did. After all, what was a single complaint in the grand scheme of things? They were just another set of passengers, another minor inconvenience to the airline's routine operations. Richard's dismissive attitude was a dangerous mistake. He had no idea that this seemingly insignificant incident was already snowballing into something that would change the course of their lives. The flight attendants had been too casual, too careless with their actions. They hadn't realized that they were on the precipice of a crisis. The calmness in Richard's demeanor masked the impending storm. Andre's thoughts drifted back to the matter at hand. He had spoken to Raymond, and now it was time to move forward. He knew that his reputation, more than anything, would be the thing that could either save or destroy this situation. But what neither he nor Richard knew yet was that the situation was being observed more closely than either could have anticipated. While Richard and Gregory dismissed the incident as just another complaint, the ripples of their negligence were already starting to spread. The balance had shifted. The scales were tipping, and neither side knew it yet. The morning after the flight, the routine complaint Andre Brown filed against Altura Airlines took an unexpected and catastrophic turn. What had started as an ordinary report, made out of a sense of responsibility to protect his son and his reputation, soon spiraled into something far beyond anyone's control. A series of videos, shot discreetly by passengers who had witnessed the altercation with the flight attendants, surfaced on social media. The clips, though brief, captured the flight attendants' laughter, their casual dismissal of the situation, and their comments about the spoiled meal. The passengers had clearly found amusement in Andre's discomfort, and it was their lack of concern for the seriousness of the incident that added a sting to the already painful affair. The footage was grainy, but the expressions on the flight attendants' faces were unmistakable: amusement, indifference, and contempt. The first video went viral within minutes. A few more followed, all painting a similar picture of a company that didn't take its customers seriously, particularly when one of those customers was not just a regular passenger, but a powerful health official. News outlets across the country picked up the story, each one adding its own spin, magnifying the situation far beyond its initial scope. They ran with the footage, fueling the fire. The hashtag #SpoiledMealBetrayal began trending before the sun had fully risen, and the Twitterverse exploded with commentary, most of it damning. The online community was swift to condemn the flight attendants for their lack of professionalism, but the broader undertones were unmistakable. A powerful man, a health official in the city, had been humiliated in a public space by a group of employees who thought they could get away with it. Andre's phone rang off the hook. Reporters and politicians alike sought his statement, knowing full well the weight his name carried. But Andre, as he sat at the kitchen table staring at his son, still shaken from the ordeal, couldn't bring himself to answer most calls. Instead, he sat frozen, mind racing. He had always been a figure of strength, a man who was used to being in control. But now, his calm exterior was cracking, and his thoughts were clouded with uncertainty. Was this about the spoiled meal anymore? Was it about his son's health, or had it become about something more? Outside, the storm was beginning to gather speed. The pressure was suffocating as Andre Brown stood before the microphone in the packed press room. His fingers rested lightly on the podium, a calm facade masking the storm brewing inside him. The incident with the spoiled meal, a moment of simple cruelty on the part of the flight attendants, had spiraled into a media firestorm. And now, Andre had to navigate this growing chaos without losing control. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the sea of reporters, their eyes sharp and expectant. They weren't here for the details of his son's health or the cold, clinical response from Altura Airlines. No, they were here for the drama, for the story, for the next scandal they could latch onto and exploit. And Andre knew this better than anyone. He had always been a strategist, understanding the game that was being played. But now, he was the target. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but with a slight edge of strain. "I stand before you today not as a politician, but as a father, someone who is committed to ensuring the safety and well-being of every citizen, especially when it comes to the basics of public health." His words were carefully measured, each sentence chosen to reinforce his professionalism, his calm demeanor in the face of what could be a career-damaging event. His son, Marcus, who had been the victim of this thoughtless act, was now a symbol of resilience. But it was also a painful reminder of how fragile their reputations could be in the hands of the media. The room fell silent, every eye trained on Andre, waiting for the crucial moment when the full weight of his accusation would fall upon Altura Airlines. But Andre held back, resisting the urge to lash out. He knew his statement could turn the tide, but he wasn't about to give the airline any ammunition to twist his words. "In the wake of this incident, I have requested a full investigation into the safety practices of Altura Airlines," Andre continued, his tone firm, almost resigned. "What happened on that flight was more than a simple mistake. It was an example of systemic negligence. An incident like this shouldn't have happened, and it certainly shouldn't have been treated with such indifference by the staff." Behind the scenes, Raymond Shaw was already working tirelessly, gathering evidence. The man who had been with Andre through countless political campaigns and crises was now digging into Altura's past, uncovering similar complaints that had been ignored or buried. Raymond had always been methodical, but there was an urgency in his work now that Andre hadn't seen before. If he could find the right piece of evidence, something solid that tied Altura Airlines to a broader pattern of misconduct, it could turn the public tide in their favor. Meanwhile, back in the confines of the flight attendant's lounge, Gregory Hartwell, the man responsible for the spoiled food incident, was beginning to feel the weight of the media spotlight. The whispers had started long before Andre's press conference, but now they were growing louder. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. The more the media dug, the more they uncovered about Gregory's history, rumors of similar incidents on other flights, passengers who had been poorly treated, complaints that had mysteriously disappeared. The more Gregory tried to shake it off, the more the truth seemed to catch up with him. Gregory had always prided himself on his sense of humor, on the ability to make others laugh with his quick wit and offhand comments. But now that humor was backfiring. He could feel the eyes on him, the silent judgment of his colleagues as they exchanged knowing glances. What had been a harmless prank, a spoiled meal served to a baby, had now become the centerpiece of a national scandal. In the press room, Andre's thoughts shifted from his son's pain to the bigger picture. This wasn't just about the airline's incompetence. It was about a larger issue of public trust. If Andre didn't handle this carefully, the public would see him as nothing more than another disgruntled politician using a personal incident to score political points. He couldn't afford that, not when the stakes were this high. As the press conference continued, Andre made it clear that the airline's actions had consequences beyond just this flight. It wasn't just about one spoiled meal. It was about the airline's complete disregard for its passengers' safety and dignity. And that disregard, he knew, was part of a larger, deeply rooted problem that reached the highest echelons of corporate power. We've all seen how companies like Altura Airlines react when their mistakes are exposed, Andre concluded, his voice growing firmer. They try to minimize the damage, dismiss the issue as a minor lapse in judgment. But the truth is, this wasn't an isolated incident, and we need to hold them accountable. His words were met with murmurs from the press. Andre knew that the public's perception of the situation was rapidly evolving. The media would twist his words, frame him as an overreacting politician if they could. But there was no turning back now. He had made his stand, and the battle was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, Gregory's past would come under further scrutiny, his every move dissected in public forums. As the truth came to light, the public's opinion would shift. Andre's calm exterior hid a deep well of frustration and determination. He wasn't going to let Altura Airlines get away with this. He would fight not just for his son, but for every passenger who had ever been ignored or mistreated by the airline industry. The stakes had never been higher. This was no longer about a spoiled meal. It was a war of perception. The call came late that evening, a ring that pierced the otherwise quiet of Andre Brown's office. He answered, his fingers tightening on the receiver as if he could already sense the gravity of what was to come. "Mr. Brown, it's Ethan Rivers. You need to see this," the investigative reporter said, his voice strained with urgency. "I've been digging into Altura Airlines, and I think you'll want to know what I've found." Andre's pulse quickened, his mind racing with possibilities. The media frenzy from the spoiled meal incident was already spiraling out of control. He had hoped to put the matter to rest, but the way things were going, it was clear that the scandal had a life of its own. Now, Ethan was about to open a new chapter, and Andre wasn't sure if he was ready for what it would reveal. "Tell me," Andre replied, his tone steady despite the tension that was beginning to knot in his stomach. "I've uncovered a disturbing pattern," Ethan said, his voice lowering. "This wasn't just a one-time slip-up. I've gone through Altura's safety records. There are multiple similar incidents. Passengers receiving spoiled or unsafe food, but none of them made it to the public. These incidents have been buried, swept under the rug. I think there's a systemic issue here." Andre leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. This wasn't just about a rotten meal served to his son anymore. This was about a deeper issue of corporate negligence, one that affected the safety and well-being of countless passengers. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized just how much power Altura Airlines held over the public's perception. They had money, influence, and a well-oiled PR machine. If they were covering this up, it was for a reason. "Can you prove it?" Andre asked, his voice quiet but intense. "I can, but I'll need your help. I've got files, but they're just the beginning. I think there's more beneath the surface, and with your position you've got the leverage to make a real impact," Ethan replied, a slight edge to his voice. "The public's already questioning Altura's practices, and we can use that momentum. We can expose them for what they really are." Andre felt the weight of the decision bearing down on him. The entire situation had escalated beyond his control, and it was no longer just about his son. It was about something much larger, something systemic. But with that realization came the understanding that this battle would be harder than any he had faced before. There were powerful forces at play, and they would not go down without a fight. "I don't know," Andre muttered, leaning forward and rubbing his temples. "This could get ugly. We're talking about more than just a corporate scandal. If I expose this, it'll be a war, and I'm not sure if I'm ready to face the full force of Altura's power." "Neither of us are ready," Ethan said, his tone unwavering. "But it's bigger than both of us. This isn't just about food safety. It's about how much trust we're placing in these corporations and how far they're willing to go to protect themselves. If we don't act now, it'll continue. The public has a right to know." Andre paused, the weight of Ethan's words settling into him. He looked out the window of his office, the lights of the city blinking below. He had always been a man of integrity, someone who fought for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. But this was different. This wasn't a small mistake. It was a pattern of corruption that reached far beyond a single incident. It was a battle not just for his son's dignity, but for the integrity of an entire system. "Okay," Andre said finally, his voice steady but resolute. "Let's do it. Let's expose them." With Raymond Shaw at his side, Andre worked tirelessly to assemble a case. They went through the data, cross-referencing incident reports, diving into Altura's past, and uncovering case after case of negligence. What had started as a single, isolated event was now becoming a sprawling investigation. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, and yet the deeper they went, the more resistance they encountered. Altura's PR team worked overtime, spinning the narrative in their favor, downplaying the significance of the incidents, and trying to shift the blame onto isolated, rogue employees. But Andre knew better. This wasn't about a few bad apples, it was about a corporate culture that prioritized profit over people. They had covered up these issues to protect their bottom line, and now they would have to answer for it. As the investigation gained momentum, Andre's sense of urgency intensified. The media continued to swirl around the initial incident, but now there was a new focus: the truth about Altura's systemic failures. The airline's efforts to contain the damage were growing more desperate by the day. They knew the truth was out there, and they were doing everything they could to bury it. But Andre and Ethan weren't backing down. Together, they would make sure the story was told. And as Andre looked at the pile of evidence before him, he couldn't help but think back to that moment on the plane, when his son had been served that spoiled meal. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, but now he saw it for what it truly was: a catalyst. What started as a simple, careless mistake was now unraveling a web of corruption that had been hidden for years. It was bigger than anyone had initially realized. The first shockwave hit the newsfeed as Ethan Rivers' exposé went live. His article, titled "The Hidden Dangers of Altura Airlines," hit like a bombshell, reverberating through every corner of the media world. Ethan had spent weeks digging into the airline's history of food safety violations, documenting incident after incident where passengers had been served spoiled or unsafe food without consequence. He had unearthed a pattern of systemic negligence that painted the airline as a company more concerned with profit than passenger well-being. It wasn't just one mistake, but a series of oversights, deliberate, calculated decisions to cut corners at the expense of public health. The moment the article dropped, the public reaction was swift and fierce. Protesters, fueled by a mixture of anger and betrayal, gathered outside Altura Airlines headquarters. Their chants echoed through the streets, demanding justice and accountability from a company that had long claimed to uphold the highest standards in air travel. News cameras were everywhere, capturing the growing unrest. The story spread like wildfire, and as more people shared their own experiences with the airline's poor food safety practices, a viral hashtag began trending. #Altura exposed. But amidst the chaos, Andre Brown remained calm. Standing in the quiet of his office, his eyes locked onto his phone as he read the first lines of Ethan's exposé. His fingers gripped the edge of his desk tightly. He had known it was only a matter of time before the truth would come out, but seeing it laid bare in such a public manner still sent a wave of tension through him. The pressure on the airline's executives was palpable, and Andre knew that the battle was only beginning. He had been right all along, and this wasn't just about the spoiled food or his son's experience. This was about a system that had allowed corporate greed to run rampant for far too long. Meanwhile, in the media circus that followed, Altura Airlines CEO Thomas Greer took to the airwaves with an apology. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, too polished to be sincere. "This was an unfortunate isolated incident," he stated, his face emotionless as he read from a prepared statement. "We have a well-established protocol, and this should never have happened." His words were met with eye rolls from Andre, who knew all too well the hollow nature of corporate apologies. Andre had heard it all before, the slick PR tactics designed to gloss over any wrongdoing. But this time, Andre was ready. He had Ethan on his side now, a reporter who wasn't interested in anything less than the truth. Together, they had already begun pulling together the evidence that would expose Altura Airlines for what it was. In the quiet of the meeting room, Andre and Raymond Shaw, his trusted assistant, went over the details of their next move. Ethan had already promised to dig deeper into Greer's past, revealing connections to influential government officials that could not only implicate Altura in systemic negligence but also shed light on political favors that had kept the airline's misconduct hidden. Greer had carefully constructed a network of protection, and now it was time to unravel it. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Raymond said, his voice low and steady. He sat across from Andre, both men surrounded by stacks of documents and legal briefs. The public already has the story, but they'll only care for so long. What we need is something irreversible." Andre's eyes narrowed. He knew Raymond was right. The media would move on quickly unless something concrete broke through. And that's exactly what they had to find. As the days went by, the pressure on Greer's inner circle grew. Andre's team of legal experts worked tirelessly to track down every piece of evidence that might tie the airline's executives to the cover-up. Meanwhile, Ethan's investigation began to reveal troubling connections between Greer and several high-ranking officials, men who had helped sweep Altura's violations under the rug, all in the name of maintaining a shiny, unblemished public image. The web of corruption was wide, and Andre now had a direct line to the people who could expose it all. But just as the investigation was gaining momentum, Andre was blindsided by a new development. A former Altura Airlines employee, Carl Rivers, stepped forward as a whistleblower. He was a former food safety supervisor who had grown disillusioned with the airline's practices. Carl came forward with a shocking confession. He revealed that the airline had systematically falsified food safety reports for years, covering up incidents like the one with Marcus Brown. The whistleblower's story was picked up by the media like wildfire. Carl had risked his career and his freedom to expose the truth. Now, he was being hailed as a hero. But Andre wasn't the only one listening. In a quiet meeting room, Carl sat across from Andre and Raymond, his hands shaking as he passed over the documents he had taken from the airline's vaults. "I've seen the way they operate," Carl said, his voice heavy with regret. "They don't care about safety, they care about profits. And as long as they can hide the truth, they will." Andre leaned forward, feeling a surge of both gratitude and disbelief. He had just gotten the break he needed, but he knew this was far from over. Carl's revelation had opened the door, but they still needed to get to the heart of the conspiracy. Carl's testimony forced the airline's executives to make their next move. But their desperation was obvious. Altura's public relations team launched an all-out assault, claiming that the whistleblower was disgruntled and lying, that the records Carl had provided were doctored. They dug in, refusing to take responsibility for their actions. Andre knew that this would be their last-ditch effort to control the narrative. He had to act fast. The walls of secrecy were crumbling, and the truth was breaking through. If that moment made your blood boil and your heart ache, don't stay silent. Subscribe and become a member, because standing up to cruelty is how we protect the vulnerable. The phone call came late that night, just as Andre was finishing a meeting with his team. He had been preparing for the next round of media interviews, trying to fortify his public image amidst the ongoing scandal. The past few days had been a whirlwind, and he could feel the pressure mounting. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the phone, half expecting another interview request or an angry voicemail. Instead, the voice on the other end was someone he hadn't expected to hear from, Carl Rivers, a former employee of Altura Airlines. "Mr. Brown, I need to speak with you." Carl's voice was low, shaky, and filled with a sense of urgency. Andre paused, pushing aside the fatigue that had been weighing on him. "What is it, Carl?" he asked, his tone professional but concerned. The last time he had heard from Carl, he had been just another nameless employee of the airline, but something in the man's voice told Andre that this was different. Carl hesitated, then spoke, his words coming out in a rush. I've been part of a cover-up. The airline, they've been falsifying safety and food quality reports for years. The management has been hiding incidents like this for so long. I can't live with it anymore. I need to tell you everything." Andre's pulse quickened. His mind raced as Carl's confession sank in. This wasn't just about spoiled food on a plane anymore. It was bigger, darker, a corporate cover-up. Years of negligence hidden behind a veil of false reports. It was a scandal that could shake the very foundation of the airline industry. "Why now?" Andre asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He was fighting the urge to jump to conclusions. "Why come forward now, after all this time?" Carl's voice faltered. Because I've seen what they've done, and I'm tired of pretending. I can't live with knowing how many people have been hurt because of this. People like you, Mr. Brown. They don't care. They just want to protect their reputation, no matter the cost." Andre closed his eyes, the weight of the situation sinking in. He had known there was more to this than just an isolated incident, but hearing Carl's confession made it real, made it undeniable. "What do you have? What proof?" Carl sighed heavily. "I've got documents, emails, internal memos. I can show you everything. I don't expect you to believe me right away, but you'll see for yourself." Andre's mind spun. The battle against Altura Airlines had just escalated. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. It was about exposing corruption on a massive scale. He knew this could be the key to taking the airline down, but it also meant playing a dangerous game. He'd need to be careful, strategic. One wrong move and the entire investigation could blow up in his face. "Meet me tomorrow. We'll go over everything," Andre said, his voice firm. "I'll have my team there. You bring whatever you've got. And Carl, you're sure about this? Once you step forward, there's no going back." "I know," Carl replied, his voice resolute. "I've made my decision." The line went silent for a moment, the weight of Carl's decision hanging in the air. Andre hung up the phone, staring at the screen for a moment before letting out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. This was it. This was the break he had been waiting for. The next day, Carl arrived at Andre's office, his hands shaking as he handed over a thick stack of documents. Andre sifted through them, his eyes scanning the pages quickly. Each one was more damning than the last. Falsified reports, cover-up memos, and records of multiple food safety violations that had never been made public. But there was more. Carl had also included a list of names, flight attendants, managers, and senior staff members who had been involved in the cover-up, including Gregory Hartwell. Andre's stomach tightened. The man who had served Marcus the spoiled meal was more deeply entangled in this corruption than he had ever imagined. He looked up at Carl, who was standing anxiously by the desk, waiting for Andre's reaction. "You've done the right thing, Carl," Andre said quietly, though his mind was racing. He could feel the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's mistake anymore. It was a systemic issue, a web of lies and cover-ups that had been going on for years. "I hope so," Carl murmured. "I just want this to end. I want people to know what's been going on." Andre leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He could see the bigger picture now. The public scandal was only the surface. Beneath it was something much deeper, something that needed to be exposed. He couldn't back down now. This fight was far from over. "Get ready, Carl," Andre said, his voice filled with determination. "The system is rotten, and you've just exposed the heart of it." The air was thick with tension as Carl Rivers, the whistleblower from within Altura Airlines, sat across from Andre Brown in a dimly lit room. The weight of the moment was palpable, and Andre's pulse quickened with each new detail Carl divulged. Carl's hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady as he spoke, revealing the underbelly of a company that had long been more concerned with profit than passenger safety. The truth, hidden for so long, was beginning to spill out. "We've been covering up incidents like your son's for years," Carl said, his voice low but urgent. "But the system's been rigged to protect the guilty and silence those who try to speak out. They paid off employees, manipulated safety reports, and buried the truth under layers of deception." Andre leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. His thoughts raced. Every piece of evidence Carl revealed felt like another blow to the gut. He couldn't believe how deeply the corruption had burrowed into the core of the airline. It was more than just a spoiled meal. This was a system designed to exploit passengers, to prioritize profits at any cost, and to destroy anyone who got in the way. As Carl continued, Andre's mind kept drifting back to his son, Marcus. The image of the boy's face, pained, frightened, flashed before his eyes. No matter how many times Andre tried to bury the memory, it always resurfaced, a constant reminder of the fight ahead. Marcus was still struggling to recover, but he had become more than just his son to the public. He had become a symbol of resilience, a young boy who had been victimized, yet refused to be silenced. "They need to be held accountable," Andre muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Carl nodded solemnly, but his eyes betrayed a sense of urgency. "You're not the only one fighting this fight now, Andre. There are people inside the company who've had enough. They're tired of the lies, the cover-ups. The truth is coming to light, whether they like it or not." Andre looked out the window, his thoughts clouded with doubt. Even with Carl's testimony, even with the evidence beginning to pile up, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was only just beginning. The political ties between Altura Airlines executives and the government were deep, too deep. Andre feared that they would use their influence to bury the investigation, to sweep the truth under the rug where it belonged. As federal agents descended on Altura Airlines headquarters, seizing documents and questioning key players, including the company's CEO, Thomas Greer, Andre watched as the walls around the airline began to crack. He had hoped for this moment for so long, but now that it was happening, the weight of the stakes felt more real than ever. Would this truly lead to justice? Or was it just another farce? A show designed to pacify the public until the next scandal broke. Andre knew better than to trust the system. It had failed him once before, but this time he wasn't alone. The public, fired up by the injustices exposed, had rallied behind Marcus and the Brown family. Andre's son had become a symbol of all that was wrong with the airline industry. His image was plastered across news outlets, his face a reminder of the vulnerability of passengers who trusted the system. "We'll see this through," Andre whispered to himself, a renewed sense of purpose building within him. "I won't stop until they're held accountable." The investigation was far from over, and every new revelation seemed to raise the stakes even higher. But despite the danger, despite the looming threat of retaliation, Andre could feel something shift inside him. There was hope now, a flicker of light at the end of the tunnel. The truth had been set in motion, and there was no going back. He turned back to Carl, who had been watching him closely. "We're not finished yet," Andre said, his voice steady. "We won't let them get away with this." Carl gave a curt nod, his face determined. "The truth is out now. It's just a matter of time before it all comes crashing down." As the hours stretched on, the investigation unfolded at an alarming pace. More whistleblowers stepped forward, more documents were uncovered, and the truth began to unravel. But Andre knew it wasn't just about exposing the corruption. It was about fighting for the future. For Marcus, for every passenger who had been wronged. As Andre left the meeting, he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. The danger wasn't over, and the road ahead was long. But as he walked through the streets of Ledger City, he could feel the momentum building, the pressure of the moment growing. The fight had become personal, and there was no turning back. The tide was turning, but the battle was far from won. The tension in the room was palpable. Andre sat across from his team, his face drawn with exhaustion yet filled with determination. The decision to go public had already set the gears of change into motion, but he knew this battle was far from over. The night after his press conference, the weight of his words still lingered in the air like smoke. His son, Marcus, was recovering, but the damage to their family's name was a different kind of wound, one that wasn't so easily healed. The truth had been exposed, but now the true fight for justice had only begun. Andre had known from the start that going public would ignite something far bigger than the incident itself. What started as a personal wrong had evolved into a nationwide outcry against corporate negligence. News outlets picked up the story, and soon social media was ablaze with public outcry, calling for stricter regulations on food safety within the airline industry. The hashtag #FoodSafetyNow trended for days as people from all over rallied behind Marcus and his family. What had once been a single incident was now a movement, one that had the potential to change the aviation industry forever. Behind the scenes, Andre worked tirelessly. Early mornings turned into late nights as he met with lawmakers, safety advocates, and industry experts to draft new regulations. His office became a whirlwind of action, with Raymond Shaw and the rest of his team navigating through stacks of reports, correspondence, and strategy documents. Andre's resolve was unshakable, his every action calculated. He had become the face of a revolution, though he never sought the spotlight. He knew this was about something much greater than his own reputation. It was about protecting every passenger who had ever been mistreated by the system. The weight of the task began to take its toll. Meetings with lawmakers were often tense, filled with sharp debates over what needed to be done. Every conversation felt like a delicate negotiation, balancing the interests of the public, the airlines, and the powerful figures who still held influence. The stakes had never been higher. Andre wasn't just fighting for his son anymore, he was fighting for the truth to prevail. But every step forward seemed met with a dozen obstacles. There were factions within the political landscape who had deep ties to the airline industry, and they were not ready to let go of their lucrative relationships. Andre knew they would stop at nothing to protect their interests. And then Altura Airlines made their move. The airline, in a desperate bid to salvage what was left of their reputation, launched a counter-campaign. It was a calculated move, one that had been waiting in the wings for just such an opportunity. The media, always hungry for a sensational story, was quick to pick up the narrative. The airline accused Andre and his team of blowing the incident out of proportion, claiming that this was nothing more than a petty mistake. They painted Andre as a man exploiting a simple error for political gain. The smear campaign came in full force. Altura's PR department flooded the media with stories of how Andre's actions were nothing more than a stunt, an attempt to ruin a legitimate business. The tone was condescending, and the lies were carefully crafted to undermine Andre's credibility. For a moment, Andre wondered if the public would believe the airline's narrative. The thought gnawed at him. What if they succeeded? What if his reputation was destroyed before he could enact the changes that were so desperately needed? Despite the overwhelming pressure, Andre didn't flinch. He could feel the weight of the battle growing heavier with every passing day, but he knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about his reputation or his family. This was about accountability, about showing the world that corporations couldn't operate above the law, that their mistakes had consequences. One night, as he sat in his office, scrolling through the latest reports on the smear campaign, Andre's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Raymond. His voice on the other end was steady but filled with a sense of urgency. "Andre," Raymond said, "we've got them. The documents we were waiting for, everything we need to expose their corruption. It's all here." The sense of relief that flooded Andre's chest was brief. The battle was far from over. But now there was proof that the airline had not only neglected food safety, but had covered it up, protecting their own interests at the expense of public health. As he hung up the phone, Andre's mind raced. The next steps had to be precise, calculated. The game had changed. The public wasn't just angry, they were demanding action. He had to stay ahead of the game, to turn the tide in their favor before Altura could strike again. The following days were a blur of meetings and strategy sessions. Andre, with the help of Raymond and his legal team, began working on a new strategy. They would turn the narrative back on Altura Airlines, but this time, they would do it with evidence. Undeniable, damning evidence. Meanwhile, the smear campaign from Altura continued, growing louder with each passing day. But Andre wasn't going to let them silence him. He had fought too hard, had already sacrificed so much. As the battle escalated, he remained unyielding, knowing that the truth was on his side. The air inside the press room was heavy, thick with the hum of eager reporters and the murmurs of public speculation. Andre Brown sat at the head of the long table, his back straight, his expression a mask of composure. His eyes, however, betrayed the storm brewing inside. He had been through countless political battles in his career, but this was different. The bright lights flashing from cameras felt more like a weight pressing down on him. The incident on the plane, once an embarrassing inconvenience, had exploded into something far more damaging, not just for the airline, but for him personally. As he addressed the room, his voice firm but tinged with fatigue, Andre could feel the weight of every accusation swirling around him. The media had turned on him, questioning his motives. Was he truly fighting for food safety, or was this an elaborate play to further his own political agenda? His son's suffering, suffered at the hands of a careless airline, was being twisted, reshaped into a political weapon. The reporter's eyes bored into him, probing for a crack in his resolve, a moment of doubt to exploit. Their questions came fast and sharp, each one trying to untangle his emotions, each one attempting to diminish his credibility. "Do you believe that you've been using your son's situation to score political points?" one reporter asked, his voice slicing through the tense air. Andre didn't flinch. What happened to Marcus was a mistake that should never have happened, but it's part of a bigger issue. This isn't just about a bad meal, it's about a system that has been allowed to cut corners for far too long. We're talking about the health and safety of millions of passengers, not just my son. The room shifted uneasily. Andre's words rang true, but the damage was already done. Doubt had been sown. As his words faded, another question came. "Are you sure you're not overreacting to a simple oversight? After all, it was just food." It was a jab meant to belittle, and Andre's jaw tightened. He felt the heat of anger rising, but he tamped it down. In the back of his mind, he could hear Raymond Shaw's voice, calm and steady. "Hold it together, Andre. Don't give them what they want." Raymond had been his right-hand man through the thick of it all, tirelessly working behind the scenes to shield Andre from the worst of the media storm. But even Raymond couldn't stop the tidal wave of public scrutiny that was bearing down on him. The harsh glare of the cameras felt like a personal attack. His son's face, his small hands burned by the airline's negligence, was being used as the backdrop for a political circus. They wanted to know if Andre was overreacting, if he was exploiting his son's pain for the sake of his own power. And what made it worse, Andre realized with a sickening feeling in his gut, was that some of the critics were right. They weren't just questioning his actions. They were questioning his heart, his integrity. Later that night, as the last of the reporters trickled out of the press room, Andre sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He was tired, exhausted in a way he hadn't felt in years. The stress of the past few weeks, the weight of public opinion, had taken its toll. He wasn't just fighting for food safety anymore. He was fighting for his reputation, for his family, for everything he had worked so hard to build. His mind wandered to Marcus, his son, the innocent child at the center of this storm. He had tried so hard to protect him, to shield him from the harsh realities of the world. Now, he was forced to expose them to the world's scrutiny. Raymond entered the room with a grim look on his face. He had just returned from the press conference where the damage had already been done. "The media's not letting up. They're spinning it in every direction," Raymond said, his voice low. He paused, eyeing Andre's weary expression. "But it's not just them, Andre. They're starting to question your whole approach. There's a lot of talk about your personal involvement in this, about your own political career." Andre took a deep breath, leaning forward. "I know. I can feel it. They're turning this into something it's not. I didn't ask for this. None of this was part of the plan." Raymond placed a file on the table, its contents weighing heavily in the air between them. "We're not the only ones being targeted. I've been digging, Andre. The airline, they've started planting false accusations about you. They're tying this to your health practices, claiming that you've been using your position to cover up your own mistakes." Andre's chest tightened. The truth had always been his ally, but now it felt like even the truth was being weaponized against him. "They're trying to destroy me," he muttered, the weight of the realization sinking in. Raymond nodded. "They're desperate, Andre. But this fight? It's bigger than you think. It's not just about food safety anymore. It's about survival. You're up against one of the most powerful industries in the world, and they'll do anything to protect their interests." Andre stood up, his body tensing. He had come into this fight with one goal: to protect his son. Now the stakes were much higher. He had to protect everything he stood for: the truth, the integrity of his work, and the legacy he hoped to leave behind. He couldn't let them break him. He wouldn't. "They think they can break me," Andre said quietly, his eyes narrowing with resolve. "But they don't know who they're dealing with." Raymond hesitated, his eyes studying Andre carefully. "You're going to need more than just a good strategy. You'll need everything you've got. You're fighting not just for Marcus, but for everything you've built." Andre turned toward the window, staring out at the city lights twinkling below. "I didn't come this far to lose now." There was a pause, a heavy silence. Then Raymond spoke again, softer this time. "This has become a war, Andre, and it's not just about what's right. It's about survival." Andre nodded, his mind focused on the battle ahead. He had come too far to back down now. The fight had become more than a matter of principle. It was now about survival. Andre stood backstage, his fists clenched, every muscle in his body taut with anticipation. The tension was almost palpable as the cameras rolled, the bright lights casting harsh shadows on the floor, making everything feel surreal. This was it, his moment to confront Thomas Greer, the CEO of Altura Airlines, and expose the truth that had been buried beneath layers of corporate deception. The debate was set to be televised, a spectacle for the public, and Andre knew it would either make or break his fight for justice. His son, Marcus, was in the hospital recovering from the trauma of that dreadful flight, but Andre wasn't just fighting for Marcus anymore. He was fighting for every person who had ever been wronged by an airline, for every passenger who had been ignored and dismissed. He had come to realize that this battle was far bigger than a spoiled meal. It was about holding power accountable. "Remember why you're doing this," Raymond Shaw, his assistant, said quietly, stepping beside him. Raymond's calm demeanor was the steadying force Andre needed in that moment. "Don't let Greer throw you off course." Andre nodded, taking a deep breath. He adjusted his tie and stepped forward, the weight of the entire nation's eyes on him. The debate hall was packed with reporters, politicians, and media personnel, all waiting to see the confrontation unfold. On the other side of the stage, Thomas Greer stood confidently, his posture rigid, his face a picture of corporate arrogance. He didn't know it yet, but today would be the beginning of the end for his carefully constructed narrative. The moderator, a well-known news anchor, introduced the participants. "Today, we have a special debate on the recent controversy surrounding Altura Airlines. Health Secretary Andre Brown will be discussing his claims against the airline, particularly the incident involving his son, Marcus. On the other side, we have Thomas Greer, the CEO of Altura Airlines, who will respond to these allegations." The moderator turned to Andre first. "Mr. Brown, you have the floor." Andre didn't waste time. He stepped up to the podium, his voice steady but firm. "Thank you. What happened to Marcus was a mistake that should never have happened. But it's part of a bigger issue. This isn't just about a bad meal. It's about a system that has been allowed to cut corners for far too long. We're talking about the health and safety of millions of passengers, not just my son." The room shifted uneasily. Andre's words rang true, but the damage was already done. Doubt had been sown. As his words faded, another question came. "Are you sure you're not overreacting to a simple oversight? After all, it was just food." It was a jab meant to belittle, and Andre's jaw tightened. He felt the heat of anger rising, but he tamped it down. In the back of his mind, he could hear Raymond Shaw's voice, calm and steady. "Hold it together, Andre. Don't give them what they want." Raymond had been his right-hand man through the thick of it all, tirelessly working behind the scenes to shield Andre from the worst of the media storm. But even Raymond couldn't stop the tidal wave of public scrutiny that was bearing down on him. The harsh glare of the cameras felt like a personal attack. His son's face, his small hands burned by the airline's negligence, was being used as the backdrop for a political circus. They wanted to know if Andre was overreacting, if he was exploiting his son's pain for the sake of his own power. And what made it worse, Andre realized with a sickening feeling in his gut, was that some of the critics were right. They weren't just questioning his actions, they were questioning his heart, his integrity. Later that night, as the last of the reporters trickled out of the press room, Andre sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He was tired, exhausted in a way he hadn't felt in years. The stress of the past few weeks, the weight of public opinion, had taken its toll. He wasn't just fighting for food safety anymore. He was fighting for his reputation, for his family, for everything he had worked so hard to build. His mind wandered to Marcus, his son, the innocent child at the center of this storm. He had tried so hard to protect him, to shield him from the harsh realities of the world. Now, he was forced to expose them to the world's scrutiny. Raymond entered the room with a grim look on his face. He had just returned from the press conference where the damage had already been done. "The media's not letting up. They're spinning it in every direction," Raymond said, his voice low. He paused, eyeing Andre's weary expression. "But it's not just them, Andre. They're starting to question your whole approach. There's a lot of talk about your personal involvement in this, about your own political career." Andre took a deep breath, leaning forward. "I know. I can feel it. They're turning this into something it's not. I didn't ask for this. None of this was part of the plan." Raymond placed a file on the table, its contents weighing heavily in the air between them. "We're not the only ones being targeted. I've been digging, Andre. The airline, they've started planting false accusations about you. They're tying this to your health practices, claiming that you've been using your position to cover up your own mistakes." Andre's chest tightened. The truth had always been his ally, but now it felt like even the truth was being weaponized against him. "They're trying to destroy me," he muttered, the weight of the realization sinking in. Raymond nodded. "They're desperate, Andre. But this fight? It's bigger than you think. It's not just about food safety anymore. It's about survival. You're up against one of the most powerful industries in the world, and they'll do anything to protect their interests." Andre stood up, his body tensing. He had come into this fight with one goal: to protect his son. Now, the stakes were much higher. He had to protect everything he stood for: the truth, the integrity of his work, and the legacy he hoped to leave behind. He couldn't let them break him. He wouldn't. "They think they can break me," Andre said quietly, his eyes narrowing with resolve. "But they don't know who they're dealing with." Raymond hesitated, his eyes studying Andre carefully. "You're going to need more than just a good strategy. You'll need everything you've got. You're fighting not just for Marcus, but for everything you've built." Andre turned toward the window, staring out at the city lights twinkling below. "I didn't come this far to lose now." There was a pause, a heavy silence. Then Raymond spoke again, softer this time. "This has become a war, Andre. And it's not just about what's right. It's about survival." Andre nodded, his mind focused on the battle ahead. He had come too far to back down now. The fight had become more than a matter of principle. It was now about survival. Andre stood backstage, his fists clenched, every muscle in his body taut with anticipation. The tension was almost palpable as the cameras rolled, the bright lights casting harsh shadows on the floor, making everything feel surreal. This was it, his moment to confront Thomas Greer, the CEO of Altura Airlines, and expose the truth that had been buried beneath layers of corporate deception. The debate was set to be televised, a spectacle for the public, and Andre knew it would either make or break his fight for justice. His son, Marcus, was in the hospital recovering from the trauma of that dreadful flight. But Andre wasn't just fighting for Marcus anymore. He was fighting for every person who had ever been wronged by an airline, for every passenger who had been ignored and dismissed. He had come to realize that this battle was far bigger than a spoiled meal. It was about holding power accountable. "Remember why you're doing this," Raymond Shaw, his assistant, said quietly, stepping beside him. Raymond's calm demeanor was the steadying force Andre needed in that moment. "Don't let Greer throw you off course." Andre nodded, taking a deep breath. He adjusted his tie and stepped forward, the weight of the entire nation's eyes on him. The debate hall was packed with reporters, politicians, and media personnel, all waiting to see the confrontation unfold. On the other side of the stage, Thomas Greer stood confidently, his posture rigid, his face a picture of corporate arrogance. He didn't know it yet, but today would be the beginning of the end for his carefully constructed narrative. The moderator, a well-known news anchor, introduced the participants. "Today, we have a special debate on the recent controversy surrounding Altura Airlines. Health Secretary Andre Brown will be discussing his claims against the airline, particularly the incident involving his son, Marcus. On the other side, we have Thomas Greer, the CEO of Altura Airlines, who will respond to these allegations." The moderator turned to Andre first. "Mr. Brown, you have the floor." Andre didn't waste time. He stepped up to the podium, his voice steady but firm. "Thank you. What happened to my son was not just an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger pattern of negligence at Altura Airlines. This company has been putting passengers at risk for years, prioritizing profits over people. The incident with Marcus was just one of many instances of food contamination and unsafe practices which have been ignored or covered up by the airline." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The room was silent, all eyes on him. "Today, I'm here to ensure that this stops, that this company is held accountable for its actions, and that no other family has to go through what mine has." As Andre spoke, he could feel the weight of the evidence he had meticulously gathered over the past few weeks. He wasn't just speaking from his own experience. He had the facts, the records, the proof that Altura's negligence was systemic. He glanced at the screen behind him, where images of past incidents began flashing: spoiled food served to passengers, unsanitary kitchen practices, the airline's history of safety violations. It was undeniable. The truth was out, and it was impossible for Greer to hide it any longer. Greer's face twisted into a grimace as he took his turn. "Mr. Brown, I understand that this incident involving your son was upsetting," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "But you must realize that it was an isolated mistake. The flight attendant involved has been reprimanded, and we are doing everything in our power to ensure that this does not happen again. You're making this sound like an attack on the entire company, when in fact it was one unfortunate event." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This is nothing more than a political maneuver to discredit Altura Airlines and take advantage of a small mistake." The audacity of Greer's words sent a surge of anger through Andre, but he remained composed. This was the moment to turn the tide. "Political maneuver," Andre repeated, his voice growing colder. "What's political about a father protecting his son? What's political about exposing years of corporate malpractice? What's political about demanding accountability from a company that has put profits over public safety?" He took a step forward, his eyes locked onto Greer. "This isn't just about my son. It's about every passenger who has been treated like a second-class citizen by your company." Greer shifted uncomfortably, his confident mask beginning to crack. He attempted to regain control, but Andre was relentless, hitting him with more facts, more evidence, each one a hammer blow to the fragile narrative Greer had been peddling. "You can't deny what's been exposed, Mr. Greer. These aren't just one-off mistakes. This is systemic. And it's not just your flight attendants who are at fault. It's your entire management team, your executives, who allowed this to happen. The debate grew heated as Andre and Greer clashed, each exchange more intense than the last. Andre felt the adrenaline coursing through him, pushing him forward with every word. He knew that this was more than just a battle for his own family's dignity. It was a battle for every person who had ever been ignored, dismissed, or silenced by a corporation. As he looked out at the crowd, he saw the shift in their expressions. The doubt was starting to form in their eyes. Greer's facade was cracking, and Andre could see the tide turning. Finally, Greer, sensing his position weakening, lashed out. "You're using this tragedy to further your own agenda. You're making it sound like I'm the villain here when all I've done is run a successful airline." His voice was rising, but Andre didn't flinch. "This isn't about business, Greer. This is about people. And if you can't see that, then you're in the wrong business." The moderator attempted to regain control, but the damage was done. The audience was buzzing, the media was on edge, and Andre knew that the truth was finally breaking through. He had exposed the corruption, the lies, and the deception. The battle lines had been drawn, and the truth was winning. The meeting was set in a grand, glass-walled conference room at the heart of Ledger City, with sweeping views of the skyline that seemed to mock the pressure Andre felt building in his chest. Across from him sat Thomas Greer, CEO of Altura Airlines, his sleek suit and composed demeanor betraying the storm of scandal that raged beneath the surface. The room was stark, lit by fluorescent lights that only heightened the tension between the two men. Behind Greer, a team of corporate lawyers sat with their hands steepled, their faces unreadable. Andre's assistant, Raymond Shaw, stood behind him, silent but ever watchful. Andre's gaze was steady, his eyes cold and calculating. He had seen this before, corporations with deep pockets and powerful connections trying to buy their way out of trouble. But this time, it was different. This time, he was ready. He'd fought for truth in the face of every obstacle thrown his way, and he wasn't about to back down now. "Mr. Brown," Greer began, his voice smooth but edged with something that hinted at desperation. "We both know this situation has spiraled out of control. I'm here today to offer you a settlement, a public apology from Altura Airlines, compensation for your family's suffering, and, most importantly, the end of this public campaign against us. You can have this, and we can move forward. No further legal action, no more media attention. This could all be over." Andre's lips tightened, and he felt a flicker of anger flash through him. Greer had clearly underestimated him, thinking that money and an apology would be enough to silence the truth. He had spent months building this fight, and now, when they were on the cusp of exposing the airline's deeply rooted corruption, Greer wanted to make it go away with a check and a handshake. "Your offer is generous," Andre said, his tone measured, betraying none of his inner turmoil. "But it's not enough." A tense silence settled over the room. Greer leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing, sensing that Andre wasn't going to bend easily. "What do you want, then?" "We've given you everything that matters. Public acknowledgement, compensation." "I want the truth," Andre interrupted, his voice firm and unwavering. "I want accountability. You want to sweep this under the rug, and that's where you're wrong. Your settlement isn't going to make this go away. Not now. Not ever." Greer's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered, trying a different approach. "Look, Andre, I understand you're angry, but the fact remains, this is a small mistake. A mistake made by one employee. You don't want to make this personal." "This isn't personal for me," Andre replied, his voice colder now. "But it is for the countless people your airline has wronged. You've built your empire on deception, on sweeping your failures under the rug. This isn't about one incident. It's about a pattern of negligence that needs to be exposed." Raymond, standing behind Andre, felt his pulse quicken. He had known this moment would come, but hearing Andre speak with such conviction made him proud, even as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. The stakes had never been higher. Greer's face twisted with frustration. He was used to getting what he wanted, But Andre wasn't like the others he had encountered before. Andre was unyielding, driven by a cause far greater than his own gain. Greer's voice dropped to a near whisper, his tone now laced with something darker. You don't want to destroy everything. You don't want to tear this company apart. There's more at play here than you realize. You're poking a hornet's nest, and it's only going to hurt you and your family. A chill ran down Andre's spine, but he stood tall, refusing to show any weakness. What's really happening behind the scenes, Greer? What are you hiding? Greer didn't answer. Instead, he gestured for his lawyers to speak. They pushed forward, trying to close the deal with slick words, but Andre's mind was already made up. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about winning a lawsuit. It was about something much bigger. It was about standing up for the people who had no voice, for those who were crushed by corporate greed. And just when Andre thought he had reached the limit of what he could endure, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Raymond slid a document across the table, a report that had come in anonymously, detailing internal sabotage within the airline, implicating several executives and even some employees in a scheme to protect the airline from liability by deliberately covering up safety violations. It was a bombshell, and Andre knew it. Greer's expression darkened as he read the report, his hands trembling slightly. The room grew even more tense, the walls closing in on him. He had been caught, and now there was no way to spin it. Andre could see the desperation in Greer's eyes, the first crack in the CEO's facade. This is it, Andre thought, his heart pounding with the realization that the truth was finally out in the open. Greer was cornered, and there would be no easy way out. Greer's eyes flicked to his lawyers, but there was no turning back now. Andre's voice was calm, but inside, he felt the fire of victory burning brighter. You can't buy me, Greer, and you can't buy the truth. This battle isn't about what you're willing to pay, it's about what's right. Greer slumped back in his chair, defeated, as the weight of his own actions began to crush him. I warned you, he muttered under his breath, but it was clear to everyone in the room that he had lost. Andre stood tall, the moment of triumph bittersweet. The fight was far from over, but this victory was a crucial turning point. Their desperation was clear, but Andre would not be bought. The pressure on Altura Airlines reached a boiling point the moment the leak hit the media. The damning evidence, carefully extracted and strategically delivered by an anonymous source, unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. It was a dossier filled with details that would haunt the airline forever. Senior executives had knowingly ignored critical safety violations, putting thousands of lives at risk, all in exchange for financial incentives. A chain of emails, confidential memos, and internal reports laid bare a web of corruption, where profits were prioritized over the safety of passengers and the truth was concealed beneath layers of deceit. Andre Brown stared at the screen, the weight of what he was seeing settling heavily on his shoulders. The leak had confirmed his worst fears. He had known that something was wrong within the airline, something systemic, but this was far worse than he had imagined. The file, now in the hands of federal investigators, was quickly becoming a public sensation. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, their headlines screaming about corporate negligence on an unprecedented scale. As more and more details surfaced, the public's outrage intensified. People rallied behind Marcus, his son, who had unknowingly become the symbol of everything wrong, with a system that allowed corporate greed to flourish at the expense of safety. Outside, a steady drizzle began to fall, the weather mirroring the somber mood in Andre's office. The press conference that had been scheduled for the following morning now felt like an afterthought. This was no longer about a single spoiled meal. This was the beginning of a nationwide reckoning with corporate power. The revelations had sent shockwaves through the political landscape, and Andre found himself at the center of it all, a reluctant figurehead for a growing movement demanding accountability. The federal government, spurred on by the evidence, launched a full-scale investigation, and the wheels of justice began to turn. Andre, his face taut with exhaustion, paced back and forth in the small office. He could hear the muffled voices of his team outside the door, preparing for the upcoming public statements. Raymond Shaw, his assistant, was on the phone with multiple agencies, coordinating the legal teams. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew that this was bigger than anyone had initially realized. "This is our moment," Andre muttered to himself, his eyes narrowing as he thought of all that was at stake. The scandal had cracked open the dark underbelly of Altura Airlines, exposing its systemic corruption. But as much as the truth had been revealed, Andre couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still ahead. Inside the newsroom, Ethan Rivers sat at his desk, glancing through the latest developments with a grim expression. His exposé had been the spark that ignited the flames, but now, watching the fallout unfold, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had dug up secrets that no one had wanted to reveal, and the storm he had helped create was only growing stronger. The airline's CEO, Thomas Greer, was already scrambling to contain the damage. Behind closed doors, he was issuing apologies and promising reforms, but Ethan knew it was nothing more than a ploy, a last-ditch effort to salvage what little credibility the airline had left. Greer's words were hollow, and Andre knew it. The public apology was a carefully crafted performance designed to quell the growing tide of outrage. "This is not a simple mistake," Andre said, his voice cold as he addressed his team. "This is systematic negligence, and the truth will not be buried." His mind raced, the stakes higher than ever before. While the media frenzy reached a fever pitch, Andre's focus sharpened. He knew that this wasn't just about righting the wrongs of Altura Airlines. It was about sending a message that corporate giants could no longer operate with impunity, exploiting their workers and endangering their customers without consequence. The sound of his phone vibrating on the desk broke his concentration. It was a message from his lawyer. "Federal authorities have subpoenaed Thomas Greer for questioning. The investigation is expanding to include top executives and board members." Andre's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. With the federal investigation now underway, the wheels of justice were turning faster than anyone had anticipated. Greer and his associates were no longer safe. As the day wore on, the weight of everything Andre had fought for pressed down on him. Marcus, still recovering from the trauma of the spoiled meal, remained a quiet but powerful presence in his thoughts. The boy had become a symbol of resilience, not just for his own suffering, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by a corporation too powerful to challenge. Andre knew that Marcus's story was just the beginning of a larger conversation, a conversation that needed to continue for the sake of every passenger who had ever been subjected to corporate negligence. Late that night, as Andre looked out of his office window, the city lights blinking below, a sense of inevitability washed over him. The road to justice had only just begun. The press conference had barely ended, but Andre Brown could already feel the weight of the battle in his bones. Outside, the world had shifted. The flashing lights of reporters' cameras, the clamor of news vans, the voices of protesters shouting his name. All of it felt surreal, like a scene from a film, but this was no Hollywood script. This was his life, his family's life, and it was far from over. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he glanced down. Raymond Shaw, his assistant, had sent an update on the investigation. Andre pressed his lips together and pocketed the phone. There would be time for that later. Right now, he had to focus on his son, Marcus. The victory was still fresh. The legislation was passing, but it hadn't erased the painful memories of that day. No matter what laws were signed into effect, no matter how many apologies were made, the scars left on his family were permanent. Andre stood at the window of his office, looking out over the city. He could hear the low hum of traffic and the distant murmur of voices outside. He could feel the weight of the world pressing against him. He had won, yes, but at what cost? Marcus had endured far too much. His son, barely more than a toddler, had suffered humiliation and fear that no child should ever experience. Andre's eyes drifted to a photo on his desk, a picture of Marcus grinning, untainted by the world's cruelty. That innocent smile felt like a distant memory. "How are you holding up?" Raymond's voice broke through his thoughts. Andre turned, meeting his assistant's concerned gaze. Raymond had been with him every step of the way, helping him navigate the chaos, organizing the media frenzy, and keeping him grounded when everything felt like it might come crashing down. "I'm okay," Andre lied, though his voice was tight. "I have to be okay. Marcus needs me to be okay." Raymond nodded, but his eyes were sharp. He had seen the toll this fight had taken on his boss, and the weight of leadership often left Andre weary. "You've done more than most could ever dream of. The foundation, the new laws, it's changing things, Andre. You've changed things." Andre gave a half-smile but didn't feel the pride Raymond was trying to impart. He thought of the countless children who had been through what Marcus had, and worse, children who had been ignored, dismissed, or forgotten by those with power. His work was far from finished. That night, after the media circus had died down, Andre sat in his office, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the papers in front of him. The investigation into Altura Airlines was far from over. He had exposed the corruption, but the corporate beast wasn't easily slain. He knew the executives would retaliate, that there would be more battles ahead. He was prepared for that. But as his mind swirled with the next steps, he couldn't shake the image of his son, eyes wide with fear, hands shaking after the incident. He wasn't sure Marcus would ever be the same, but then again, perhaps that was the point. The fight had been bigger than any one person, any one incident. It was about creating a system that protected those who had no voice, who were too easily silenced. He couldn't change what had happened to Marcus, but maybe he could change the world for the next child who needed help. The phone on his desk rang, breaking his reverie. It was Raymond. "Andre, you need to see this. The public support, it's growing by the hour." Andre set down his glass and grabbed the phone. His eyes narrowed as Raymond shared the latest update: protests, more coverage, new politicians voicing support. The media had turned. What had started as a single incident of spoiled food had become a call to action, and Andre was at the center of it. The tide was turning in his favor, but that didn't mean the fight was over. There were still powerful forces at work, pulling strings behind the scenes. He had to remain vigilant. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Andre had made a decision. He couldn't wait any longer. He would honor Marcus. He would build something meaningful, something lasting that would outlive this scandal and bring real change. With that thought in mind, Andre went to his study, grabbing a pen and paper, drafting the first lines of what would become the Marcus Brown Foundation. A place where children's safety would be guaranteed, a place where accountability would never be negotiable. When he finally looked up from the papers, Marcus was there, standing in the doorway, his small face lit by the soft glow of the hallway light. His son had always been strong, even in the darkest moments. And as Andre looked at him, he realized that strength wasn't just about physical resilience. It was about the quiet, unwavering determination to rise, no matter what. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Marcus said, his voice soft but firm. His words hit Andre harder than he expected. "You're the reason I'm doing this, Marcus. You always have been." As they stood there together, Andre knew that no matter how long the fight took, they had already won something far more important than any victory in a courtroom or legislation. They had fought for the truth, and the truth had made them stronger. He thought no one would care, but the health secretary's family doesn't tolerate this. If you stand for justice, accountability, and protection, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to highlight the dangers of neglect and the importance of respect in caregiving roles. Its purpose is to raise awareness, promote empathy, and encourage accountability, safety, and professionalism in all service environments.